I grew up with a German Jewish mother, grandparents, and aunt, and was always very curious about their lives before they came to the United States, but I really got very little of that story. It was clearly very uncomfortable, and it was kind of confusing because my mother told me, you know, everybody got out, no one in our family was murdered in the Holocaust, and something in me was just like, that didn't sound right.
Terry, would you like to tell us who Stolperstein is laying here and how this came to be?
Yes, here is a Stolperstein for my mother, Ingelore Silberbach, who was a student at Königin-Luise-Schule until Easter of 1938, when she was in the last class of Jewish girls who were expelled for being Jewish. This Stolperstein was laid in March of 2022, not quite at the end of Corona. So I was not here for that. But there were already many stones that had been laid because of the research that has been done by students in the Projektkursgeschichte, initiated and run by Professor Dirk Erkelens. And I had been contacted in July of 2021 in an email message through Ancestry.com. And the email said, "Hello, my name is Anna. I'm a 16-year-old student at Königin-Luise-Schule. And in my special history class, we're studying the lives and fates of Jewish girls who attended our school during National Socialism. I found the name of my subject, Ingelore Silberbach, on an unpublished family tree on Ancestry.com, and I would really appreciate if you would make it public so I can do my assignment. Oh, and maybe you'll tell me how you're connected." And she had no idea that Ingelore Silberbach was my mother. My mother had never spoken about any details about her life before they fled. So it was just quite an amazing experience to have this whole mystery of my mother's young life begin to open up through a 16-year-old, 6,000 miles away. I was in my home in Berkeley, California, and it began this incredible, amazing 3-month collaboration that we conducted, you know, of her research and my finding family photographs and artifacts that I could share with her. And so this was one of the many results of that process. It's also very interesting to me to always come to this courtyard at the school, because now I know many of the other family members connected to people who are memorialized here. At the time, this was a singular experience for me and my family. For example, the stone right next to my mother's is for Lieselotte Kramer, Lillian Lichtman. She and my mother had actually lived 30 minutes apart in Southern California for 40 years, but didn't know it. Their names had changed, and no Facebook, no internet, no anything. And I met the daughter, and she also lives about 30 minutes from me in the Bay Area now. So, you know, we've become friends. It's just been quite extraordinary. I have really good, wonderful feelings now and connection to see that this work has affected thousands of descendants around the world, the work that these students have taken on voluntarily to do this incredible research. So it's just always very moving to come here. They have the school has a large ceremony every year in honor of 9 November, Rijksprogrammnacht. And I've been lucky to be here the last few years. And this year they laid, a couple more stones. The students are still doing research. They're just about, I think, at the end of the list, which they are having to reconstruct because all of these records were destroyed either from bombing during the war or from the collapse of the Cologne archive. And so they've just very thoughtfully and carefully over the years just reconstructed as much as they can of the student lists and all that kind of thing. These 4 stones, these students, these classmates were classmates of my mother. They were all in the same class at Königin-Luise-Schule. They were all expelled at Easter of 1938, which is something I didn't know. That came from Anna. That was part of her research, to meet so many of the descendants of these people. So to have friends now, represented here from Peru and California and Northern California, Southern California, Remscheid. I have a much broader connection than just my one family stone. And I think that's one of the things about this work that I'm doing now, but that's available, and I'm trying to help it be more available to more descendants. And honestly, to anyone who lives in Köln or visits Köln, is it's not just, you see a stone and you may not know anything about that person except the information that's on the stone. But they had lives, so there's a whole fabric of life that can begin to be put together again. I think it's not just important for the descendants, I think it's important for the society to be able to just have a deeper understanding and connection to that, the life and the community beyond just this important memorial. But it's just the beginning, it's not the ending. They put this wall together as soon as the new building was open. And it's just quite powerful, obviously again for the descendants, but for these students, who've done this incredible research. It's changed their lives as much as it's changed our lives, honestly. I know it means a lot to everyone here. It certainly means a lot to me to see this. They had pictures already on their website for a long time, but this is quite something else, So yes, I love seeing my mom up there.
Where's your mom?
She's the second from the left in the gold frame with her braids. I hadn't even noticed before, so just below that to the right There's a photograph of my Aunt Gisela and my mother on the ship going to the United States in September of 1939. And the picture to the right of my mother, see, I haven't spent that much time here. This is so great. The picture to the right of my mother's photo is her graduation photo from the Yavne in September of 1938. And I had put that in a digital photo album. My mother had written on the top of this picture in her photo album, "My last form." So when I put it in the digital photo album for Anna, I wrote my mother's graduation photo from Königin-Luise-Schule. So I had written, this was from Königin-Luise-Schule, and she wrote back, no, that's not, that must be from the Yavne. At that time, I had no idea what the Yavne was. I'm like, what's the Yavne? Question number one. Question number two, how do you know? She said, well, because, she says quite casually, I thought, because your mother was expelled at Easter of 1938, which was, again, complete news to me. And secondly, there were only girls at Königin-Luise-Schule in that period of time, and there's boys in that picture. There's so much more about that particular photograph that gets into this weaving of the life beyond the stone, you know, or a single picture or single fact. There's someone in that photograph who my family, it turns out, had deep connections with, both a generation or two before that photo was taken, and now 2 generations later. So this continues to unfold. I had this box of photographs and, you know, things that my mother never talked about. And then Anna shows up. Then I give her some things and she comes back with, oh, that's not what you think it is. Or, oh, my classmate got that exact same picture from your mother's best friend's daughter. What?
How did these revelations shape your understanding of your family, of your identity, your upbringing, your everything? I mean, you didn't know about your family's persecution because they never talked about it.
Right. Well, of course, I knew that they had been forced to flee. And I could feel that, the weight of that. But yeah, it just wasn't discussed at all. So the identity shift for me came over time. It was not at the very beginning. It was exciting at the very beginning just to start getting some details about my mother's life and have it be more specific and not so vague. And so that was quite helpful. But what's happened since then and continues to happen is the thing that I think keeps changing and shifting my identity and actually, while I'm getting answers to many questions, there's many, many more questions now. And unfortunately, there's no one left alive to be able to have those conversations with. So it's like, I've often said, it's like a 1,000-piece puzzle. And I started out with 376 pieces with no finished picture. And now I might have 792, but I'm never going to have 1,000 pieces. I will never have the complete picture of what their lives were like or why they made the decisions and the choices that they made.
Why do you think your family never chose to speak about their past in Germany, about their persecution, about their escape in 1938? I mean, it must be very hurtful, of course, but what do you think personally?
Yeah, well, I've since learned that for that generation of Jews, of Germans, that is par for the course. And so it doesn't make it better, but it gives me a broader understanding. I believe, but I don't know, that the motivation was, the conscious motivation was, it's better if they don't know, right? That it was done consciously as a protective measure, that our children and grandchildren have no reason to have to know about this suffering. Let's just live in the now and not dwell on the past. So I believe that's the conscious motivation. I believe also that there's unconscious motivation, which is also protecting themselves from reliving this trauma. And because of all we know now in cognitive science about intergenerational trauma, there was really zero understanding of that when I was born in the 50s. That's all. I would say that most people in the world still don't know about this, but having been a cognitive scientist early in my career, I've been following this quite closely. So I believe that they really thought that not talking about it would let this past be buried, and had no appreciation for how they carried their trauma. Burying it was not a way of healing it, and that they didn't understand that descendants carry this genetically as well as through those relationships. So there's more knowledge now, and I was always different than my family, always very interested in shedding light on things that were kept in the dark. That's my personality. That always has been. Nothing has changed about that, except now I have more to work with. I can pursue this now because Anna sent me an email 6,000 miles away, a couple generations away, and we began this incredible exchange.
I really like this image that you just painted with the puzzle, and you only have a certain amount of pieces. That brings me to my next question. After finding out about your mother's history due to Anna and due to the Königin-Luise-Schule, how did it come that you founded the An-Erasure project? Would you like to tell a little bit about the idea behind it?
Yeah. So obviously the first seed of something that I had no concept of before came from Anna's email and the Projektkursgeschichte class that she was taking from Dirk Erkelenz at Königin-Luise-Schule. But it got planted and then it sat there for a while. One of the things that Anna told me, that with our permission at the end of her research project, that the school would like to lay a Stolperstein in their courtyard, and already had a collection of stones honoring other students who those students in the Projektkursgeschichte had studied. And so I said, of course, that would be wonderful. But it was the first time that I understood that it was possible to lay Stolpersteine for people who had survived. And I thought, well, maybe I had gotten it wrong, but I went back and realized that at the beginning of Günter Demnich's a wonderful project, that it was only for people who had been murdered. It was not just for people who were persecuted. It didn't include people who were persecuted but were able to flee. And so I thought it would be very strange for my mother to have a Stolperstein at the school, but my family, her sister and her parents and grandmother, would not have stones for them. And so I began the process with NS-Doc of applying. I asked my family first if they would agree to this. It wasn't certainly my own personal decision alone. And they said, yes, that would be fine. And we began that process in September of 2021. And in May of 2022, found out that we were on the list for October of 2022. So the first time I ever was in Köln was for that Stolpersteine Verlegung in front of my family's villa, which still stands in Marienburg. And I had seen photographs of this from my aunt had visited with her 2 sons and daughter-in-law in 1991. And the villa had been cut up into flats, and they had rung the bells and someone wasn't home, someone said no, and a student who lived on the top floor, which is, I learned later, where my aunt and mother lived with their Kinderfräulein, they were able to go up and see the flat. And so I had these pictures of this very old-looking building that had not been well cared for. And I was quite shocked to learn the day before I arrived in Köln that this building had been purchased 20 years earlier in 2002. Is that right? Yeah, 2002. And that the new owners had completely restored the villa. And so they received a letter a week before Stolpersteine are laid anywhere, at least in Köln. A letter goes out from the organizing body, again in Köln it's NS-Doc, that just to let them know that this is taking place on the public sidewalk. And because there's no possibility for people to object, this was one of Günter Demnich's brilliant ideas about how to do this kind of memorialization. No one's permission was required except for the Stadt. And so someone who's become a very dear friend, but who I didn't know except for a few email exchanges, Rita von Schwarzenberg, had asked NS-Doc to include her name and number on the letter that they sent to the owners, the current owners, so that they would contact her. And so they get this letter from the Stadt, and the owner calls my friend, Rita, and says, there's some mistake, there's been a mistake. And she said, well, why do you say that? He said, well, when we bought the house 20 years ago, the grandson of the architect and an elderly neighbor gave us the names of every owner, and there were never any Silberbachs who owned the house. And she said, well, I am quite sure that the Stadt would not allow Stolpersteine to be laid unless they had proof. But I didn't do the research. Ibrahim Basalama at NS-Doc did the research. I would suggest that you call him. So the owner calls Ibrahim, and 2 hours later calls back and says, oh my God, I had no idea. Because the evidence were in the original red leather-bound Adressbuch from 1918 to 1938, my great-grandfather and grandfather owned this property until it was stolen by the Nazis. So at that, he invited us, if we wanted, to come for tea. And so, but I didn't know this story until later in the story. This happened before I arrived, but I didn't know about it until a few days later. All right, so this is another piece of the unerasure, because all of a sudden, here's a big erasure. And of course, these awarenesses came in spurts over time. It wasn't some grand one moment where I saw the whole thing eventually. But so the first day, literally, that I was ever in Köln, I went as a guest to the home that my mother grew up in and my aunt. And it was quite astonishing. It was just an incredible experience. And one of the things that happened there was, because of Rita, who she is, I had told her that my cousin, Vernon, had written a beautiful memoir, Der blaue Salon, in English first, and then it was more recently translated into German. And he was not from Cologne, he was from NRW, but more the country, Bad Sazuflen, near Bad Sazuflen. And she had gotten the book and read the whole book before I arrived. And as we're sitting in the kitchen of this beautiful villa, at some point she asked the owners, would you mind if I read a short passage from Terry's cousin's memoir? And they agreed. And she starts reading a description of the room we're sitting in. And my cousin, and he was maybe 8, 9, 10 years old, no older than that, he had extraordinary memory for these details, because coming to visit this grand villa of his favorite tante, my grandmother, was very memorable for him. And so he describes this grand archway between the kitchen and the salon, and that there were these glass doors that connected these two rooms, or shut the rooms off. And I could see the owners, one was to my left, one was to my left, one was to my right, and out of the corners of my eye, I could see their jaws drop at the same moment. And they both stood up, and they went to either side of this huge archway where there were no doors visible, and they pulled these glass doors closed. And you know, these old things on runners, they don't do so well over time, and they had never renovated that because you'd have to tear the whole wall down. So, but they carefully pulled it together. And I know that in that moment, all of us had all the hair on our arms. Even now when I tell it, I have that same reaction. People hearing the story do. But we all just stood there or sat there in total shock at this precise description. And so it's hard to explain the feeling of this. And for them, it was really the proof that they were still skeptical. Well, what about photographs? I mean, it's not like fleeing in the middle of the night, people don't typically grab a lot of photographs with them. They did have a few, but nothing of the house. So anyway, that happened the first day that I was in Cologne. The second day I was in Cologne, I met Anna face-to-face for the first time. She had just returned that weekend from her gap year, quite coincidentally. I had no idea that she would be there. And so we met for the first time, and then we went to visit the Yavne, which I had learned from Anna is where my mother had gone to school after she and the rest of the Jewish, they were in the last class of Jewish students in Cologne to be expelled at Easter of 1938. And so we went to the Yavne, which is no longer a school, but a research and education center, and had a wonderful opportunity to begin to have a connection with this institution. I brought my mother's poesy album and had persuaded my sister had agreed that we could donate this. And because it wasn't something that we could do anything with, neither of us have children, and we didn't want it to just be lost, in a dustbin somewhere. And for them, it was this extraordinary historical document because they could get the names and verify the names of many of the students in that class. And there was a signature from a very popular teacher who Adrienne Stellmacher, the curator, had interviewed in England many years earlier. Anyway, it was just this extraordinary opportunity. And we began to also understand this particular photograph that I had misunderstood as my mother's graduation photo from from Königin-Luise-Schule, which Anna had told me in the first week of our exchange could not have been from Königin-Luise-Schule. And we discovered that the boy right in the center of that photograph was in fact the uncle of the 3 women, sisters, who had donated the Stolpersteine for my family. I mean, it was just totally astonishing. How could that possibly be? It was all coincidental, according to NS-Doc, how he pairs the donors with the families is, I said, it was not an accident. You may not have understood it, but it was not an accident. So we realized that we were all, second generation descendants, but that their uncle and my mother were actually in the same class. So this was the beginning, again, first or second full day in Cologne, another astonishing coincidence. The next day, I had been invited to speak at Liebfrauenschule, a Catholic school, by a teacher who had been a docent at the Anne Frank Huis in Amsterdam. And we had been connected through an organization, a German-American exchange organization for peace. And so I had 90 minutes with maybe 40, 16, 17-year-olds in the Protestant religion class at the Catholic school. And because Anna had just shown up and didn't have anything on her schedule, she came with me. And we walk in and I hear these squeals behind me, and it's Anna and one of the students in the class knew each other, even though they didn't go to the same school, maybe they lived in the same neighborhood. So these were her peers. And I think it was really amazing for all of them, for them to be able to ask her questions, her to be able to talk about what this experience was like from her perspective, and these students to have a sense of possibility for how they could go deeper in their government-required Holocaust education into really making contact, if not with a survivor, with a descendant of a survivor. And so it was quite astonishing. And they asked me 1,000 questions, have you ever experienced anti-Semitism since you've been in Germany? I look at my watch, I said, well, I've been here for like 48 hours. And I've been surrounded by wonderful Germans, friends, so no, but of course it's happening everywhere. And I had a slide deck and I threw up a slide of Donald Trump. This was October 2022, so before the most recent election.